butter, very much back in fashion. As you can see, I mean, I could have bought a heck of a lot more butters than this in London. Maybe we're lucky in London. But one heck of a lot more. And I've got barely an industrial butter in sight here, depending on how you define that. At the same time, the not so good news, I was speaking to farm butter producers, and they said, gosh, somebody wants to know the difference between our butters. Most people just think it's butter. And this is actually a semi-artisan producer. I mean, they produce butter from milk from enclosed herds, 50 miles circumference. They do actually make a butter for Aldi, which I hope will be a very pleasant surprise. But they're not used to anybody actually discriminating. Some people think, no, there is English butter and French butter, and then Lurpak, they're not quite sure where that's from, but there's Lurpak. Okay? So there's Lurpak, English and French. And you'll see that in our cooking we've kind of stuck to that perception to see if that's a reasonable kind of differentiation to make. And we'll also see whether it works better in different contexts. But that will come a little bit later. We'll taste those butters neat first. Now, I'm going to say a little bit about flavours in milk. I won't bore you for too long about that. But my late colleague Sarah Freeman, whom some of you may remember, who was a great expert on dairy produce and cheeses and did a heck of a lot to document the new wave of cheese production, was also very interested in the flavours in milk. And quite a few years ago now, at the Oxford Symposium, she and I conducted some research on what creates flavours in milk. And the research was both at a microbiological level, and we consulted a few microbiologists and so on, and at a kind of, anecdotal level by speaking to lots of cheesemakers, a number of whom also make butter. Cheesemakers tend to make whey butter, and we'll talk about whey butter a little bit later. But if I spend a couple of minutes telling you how many factors can affect flavours in milk and how the composition varies, that might be slightly interesting before we start tasting the butters. Okay. So we probably know that milk is mainly water, and it's got a moderate pH, and that means that lots of natural flora, bacteria, whatever you call them, can grow in it. And the composition varies between species and within breeds between species. And I've got a whole chart, which I won't particularly bore you with, but human milk is very thin. It's low in protein, it's sickly sweet, it's very high in lactose compared to cow's milk, and a human baby takes twice the time to double its weight as does a calf. Sheep's milk is more concentrated than cows in both terms of fat, it's almost double, and protein, but lactose is similar. And then Frisian milk, which is kind of the standard, contains 37 grams fat, 34 grams protein, 48 grams lactose, and so on and so forth. But that all varies seasonally. It varies very much from, obviously, winter to summer, and whether they're eating grass or hay or silage. And the differences are actually huge, and the differences in something called citrates are huge, and that has a dramatic effect on both the milk and the eventual butter. So grass might be organic, not organic, it might be unimproved, which means there's loads and loads of very different types of flora, different sorts of flora in the fields. And that makes a huge, huge difference. And we will have raw milk butters from various sources, and you can see if you can tell the difference, if there is more complexity. Now, James Montgomery was explaining that fat ratios vary on how long cows have been in the field. If they eat the leaf, which is high protein first, and then the stem, there's no protein left, and the stem is hard to digest, and that raises fat content. And so James Montgomery moves them to different patches. But can you imagine anybody commercially doing that? No. And then, as I just mentioned, winter and summer feed and so on. And obviously there's health and happiness, stress and over-milking. Poor old modern dairy cow produces 2,000 gallons of milk a year, which is 8 times the natural level needed by a wild cow to raise a calf. Cows are now being engineered to produce 4,000 gallons a year and need to be milked 4 times a day, if only so they don't get crippled and go lame. And you can probably imagine that the butter made from that milk is not going to taste great. I mean, it just isn't. It stands to reason without going into all the microbiology of it all. At the time we wrote this, Hugh Livingston was still producing goat's milk teasers from Zarnham goats, and he used to play, just to play it safe, he used to play a mixture of Mozart and heavy rock to them, because he was trying to work. It had different effects on the milk, on the flavour of the milk, on the flavour, it's extraordinary. Even the mood, apparently, of the cowgirl milking the cow has been known, documented in the past, to affect the flavour of milk. Extraordinary. Now, I don't know how many of you know that the milk that comes out from the udder of a cow is completely sterile. It is completely sterile. But instantly it comes out of the teat. It acquires lactic acid bacteria from the teat, from the grass that the cow is lying on, that some of the milk might dribble on, from the hands of the dairymaid in the past. Now, obviously, in our modern hygiene-conscious era, most of that we try to eliminate. But that's what happens. It comes out completely sterile. Lactic acid bacteria, this is fascinating. There are hundreds of thousands of them. We only know about 10,000 of them. And we've even, basically, everyone gives the lactic acid bacteria that make butter just two names. There's Streptococcus lactis, subspecies diacetylactis, and Leucostonic cremoris. And I mean, it kind of, it doesn't mean anything very much, but actually that's just two names. There are hundreds of thousands. And nobody still knows exactly how each of them affects bacteria. The butter we'll be tasting from the butter Viking, so-called, Patrick Johansson, is the result of 4 years of painstaking research worldwide, trying to look at varieties of lactic bacteria, researching historical documents and so on. And I learned a lot about lactic bacteria from him, mainly to respect them. I mean, they're our first line of defense against very many diseases. They're first line of defense against E. coli. I'll tell you now, I was going to tell you later, but certain French butters, our most esteemed, highly regarded French butters, to get that kind of animal farmyard taste that modern hygiene has removed, have been boiling down calf manure into a distillate and adding it to the milk they turn into butter. The interesting thing is that if any cow manure actually got it, if it had a dirty bum, whatever, I mean, obviously, kind of a way apart, but should that happen, the lactic acid bacteria naturally occurring in the dairy, on the dairymaid's arms, as I say, on the teats of cow, will actually kill the E. coli in the manure very, very effectively, and that's quite widely documented. And I do rather believe that. It is extraordinary. It's one of very many extraordinary serendipitous things. There's so much I could say, and I know I mustn't say too much because there just isn't time, and we've got to get you shaking stuff. That's not your own stuff, but shaking cream to make butter in a moment. And we're going to be looking at 4 different types of cream. Why don't we start with that? Let's do that. So we have 4 creams. So one is a straight supermarket, not actually Sainsbury's, straight supermarket, pasteurized double cream, as hygiene conscious as can be. It will make butter. They will all make butter. Yes, my glamorous assistant.
Yes, here I am.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Glamorous assistant. Let's have glamorous assistant with laptop. Let's show a couple of pictures with laptop. A couple of pictures. The Abernethy ones. If you. Oh, very good. Okay. Hey, what do you say about when we met them? And I will actually.
Okay, these guys are in County Down in Northern Ireland, and we went over. There was a couple of us here went there last year for a press trip, and we met this couple, Will and Alice. And they have a farm in County Down.
Yeah.
Classic story of wanting to diversify, because they want to make a living. They have this amazing milk on their farm, obviously. Green, lush grass and everything. And they started making this butter only about 2 years ago, I think. And it started with Will going around kind of agricultural shows with this butter to churn there, and he took the cream from the farm and made butter at agricultural shows, just to say, this is how it was done in my grandmother's day, his parents' day, in fact. And everybody just loved it. So out of that, they started a little tiny industry. Industry is a bigger word. Yeah. And when we were over there, 18 months. It was about March 2015, 13.
Time flies.
And they were just making enough. Hester Grimaton, who found out about it, Marcus Waring and someone else.
And then Kate told the rest of the world after.
And then I told it. I bought it for a restaurant I was working for Bristol. And in 6 months they just went huge. I mean, not huge, but they
Yeah, I hope the
increased
sun was in
production
small
10
terms.
times.
Slightly bigger than the ones you
They're
see
using
there.
big churns than this. If I just pass this round, this is quite an old computer and it's on its last
Yeah.
legs, so if you can be careful with it.
Do they know how to move on to the next picture?
I don't
Shall
know
we
how
just
to
show a
move
picture
on.
of a chair? Oh,
Let me just show.
Let's
It's not on a slideshow. I'm really technically.
let's just show a picture of a turn like 4 down or something.
4 down.
Yeah, let's go there. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
That'll do.
So what they
Oh,
do?
it's not on the screen, but never mind. Okay.
If anyone's more technically efficient,
Yeah, it was going to be shown on the TV screen, but hey, you know.
that's
it didn't work.
basically the creamy churn.
It's a small turn like this. It is stainless steel. Okay. It was this kind of size. It was a stainless steel churn. I mean, it was terribly unpretentious, and we were very surprised. They'd got 2 big plastic cartons of milk, hadn't they, Kate? And they,
Yes.
I thought, oh really? Yeah, I was expecting something kind of terribly artisan, almost coming out of tails or whatever. But they were plastic cartons of cream, and it was, and then they just started turning the thing, and that's all they did. I mean, just magic eventually. I'm sorry I can't show you the process here, but eventually it just kind of changed, And you're going to be trying that for yourselves in 1 second just to see how it works. And let me tell you now that even Harold McGee says that nobody actually understands fully how churning works. We know some very simple things, such as that milk and cream are basically a suspension of fat globules in water surrounded by membrane. And then the reverse process happens during churning.
This is what the men's up.
And you get a fat phase containing water droplets. So you've got water droplets suspended within fat and filled in by various other bits and bobs of citrates and proteins and casein and so on. But nobody actually knows precisely. What we do know is that the fat has to be warm enough for the fat globules to break through the membranes, because the membranes are quite strong. And the whole thing, as you know, butter is hard at room temperature, and cream is pretty solid if it's very thick. But when it reaches a certain temperature, room temperature, those fat globules soften enough to liquefy, break through the membranes, get attracted to each other, and then suddenly, it all codifies. So now we're going to do this. My glamorous assistant number 2.
It's not me.
Okay. Should we start one in the middle and one at the end here? Okay, if you each shake this for like 30 seconds. This is very straight, double cream, pasteurized supermarket double cream. It looks terribly unpromising. I hope it works. I've tried it all at home and worked like magic after about 3 minutes. But you do like 30 seconds each. At some stage you'll think, there's no point in my doing this, it's all got stuck to the walls of the thing, nothing is going to happen, I can't see anything. And then you keep shaking and suddenly there's this kind of thump and a slosh, and it all happens.
Magic.
So have a go. So shake it quite vigorously. You've got strong hands. Tightly closed. Shake it quite vigorously and pass it on. Okay, so if you pass clockwise.
That's not vigorous.
Harder than that.
Oh yes, maracas. Then what we would normally do is wash it, but the flavour, which is diacetyl, which is produced by one of those bacteria that I mentioned with this strange name of diacetylenosis, it actually is what produces the flavours in dairy products. And at 2 parts per million, everything tastes absolutely wonderful and buttery and fresh cream. At 4 parts per million, it tastes so foul, you throw it in the bin. So it's an extraordinarily minute difference. And to complicate the matter, there are also other bacteria that get into the system that can actually break down diacetyl into flavourless compounds. It's a really, really extraordinary thing that people are still struggling to understand. But anyhow, the virgin butter maker does not remove his buttermilk. what we'll do now is we'll put these in ramekins and pass them around for you to taste, and then you're going to be doing more shake, rattle and roll with the next stream, which will be a raw, organic, unpasteurised cream from pork farms. Very, very different. See if you can taste the difference. So we'll just put this in the ramekins and pass it around and you taste that. Okay, so I mentioned that diacetyl can be broken down into flavourless compounds called acetoins, and this can happen just even in a clean, cold, hygienic dairy. It just happens, and controlling these bacteria, like controlling nature, is quite a challenge. Now, interestingly, and there's so much serendipity, it's extraordinary, holding milk products at fridge temperature actually increases diacetyl concentrations very slowly. And McGee and others say, we don't actually know why this happens, nobody knows why it happens. But it's really serendipitous in that this diacetyl production is actually a natural detoxification mechanism. I mean, if you really want to, it converts pyruvic acid, which is accumulated from citrate metabolism, and it creates neutral carbon compounds. And as somebody says, this is what a scientist, they come up with wonderful quotes, flavour compounds are the products of necessity, which maybe means that we've actually come to like what keeps us safe, and maybe our taste in butter. They may be genetic. I come from many generations of butter-producing families in the north of Europe, in Latvia. Christopher from different area, from Scotland, we have very different taste in butter. So who knows, maybe they were adapted to what kept us safe in our natural environments. It's a very interesting thing. Another very serendipitous thing, as Patrick Johansson, whom I met with a week ago and chatted about all these things, says, is that butter releases all its full array of complex compounds at 37.8 degrees centigrade. So actually at body temperature, and this is very much what chocolate does, and I've even met some strange people who say, well, this really proves the resonance of material things that we think actually are inanimate, that they all have their own energy, and that somehow they kind of resonate with human energy. I have no idea. I mean, that's kind of another different realm. But it is extraordinary that there are products that release to our taste perceptions an array, their maximum array of phenolic compounds, flavour compounds at body temperature. Why? Have they adapted to us? Have we adapted to them? I have absolutely no idea. And I don't think anybody knows, which is again, utterly fascinating. Cream, but unlike the last one, which was an English cream which had not been fermented, in other words, it's not been allowed to either naturally ferment or had lactic bacteria added to it. This one has. This is crème crue, it is unpasteurised. It's from Weber, who some people in France swear makes the best butter. It often comes tops in all kinds of tastings, and you will be able to taste it later. You get it in one place currently in London. Sadly, Weber's shop in Knightsbridge is closed, but the Nicolas wine shop still carries butter. So this is actually, it's very different. Christopher just spooning, my glamorous assistant, sorry, Christopher, just spooning it into this, said, gosh, this is just like this is the smell I remember from when my grandmother used to make it. But I think she used wooden troughs, wooden.
Well, no, there's two different smells. The smell I was getting was literally when I was lucky enough to actually milk a cow to get the milk, and there was that wonderful, warm, slightly, I don't know, I hesitate to use the word off smell, but there was a richness there, and that's what reminded me of it. And the other story is my wife, his grandmother, also made butter, and she had these wonderful boards which you're going to show later on. But my memory is actually milking a cow, and that's the smell. Although that's fermented.
So lots of lactic acid bacteria, because this is high diacetyl, basically.
Sure,
this is what you'll be smelling. Anyway, I'd really like to know whether you do or not. I mean, what you'll be tasting here is the effect of diacetyl, and I hope whether you like it or not is one thing, but it should taste very, very different from the last one, and yet both are unpasteurised, made from unpasteurised natural creams, just that one is diacetyl added, and I was explaining how kind of serendipitous that is. I mean, just to tell you how complicated butter making is, we're now, after all these hygienic measures we do to pasteurize and so on, we select starter cultures, and we have to balance acetaldehyde producing streptococcus strains because we don't want butter to taste of yogurt, with subspecies called leuconostoc that's capping acetaldehyde, and then we add dextrose and yeast to actually nourish bacteria called leuconostoc. I mean, it is very, very, very complicated. There are some that stop the diacetyl breaking down, and some that encourage it but stop it at a certain level, and so on. So you could say that actually modern butter production is very, very accomplished. But when I spoke to Patrick Johansson, and we'll see a picture of him, and we'll certainly taste his products in 5 minutes' time, because he'll be shaking his cream and tasting his butter. He said that hygiene, I mean, this won't surprise any food writers, but he said that modern hygiene measures are the absolute enemies of butter making. I mean, there are plenty of people who swear by wooden paddles, and a butter you will taste later, the vaunted Échiré, claims that it is better than all the others, and it may not be, but it bases its claim on the fact that despite the volumes it produces, all its churns are made of wood. And that wood is never disinfected in the full sense of the word. I mean, the French are the French anyway, you know, they live in another kind of realm of health and hygiene, or not. I mean, you know, calves manure. But the wood has just the right strain of lactic acid bacteria, and they're nicely nourished and all the rest of it. And that's what you want. At the same time, Patrick Johansson is very grateful for de-iodized salt. Oh, Jonathan, you emerged at last.
Yes.
Oh.
No, just walked into a room.
So de-iodized salt, which stops all the lactic acid bacteria killing organisms. So iodine is actually kills off lactic bacteria. So when you add salt to butter, all the butters you've been tasting have been without salt, and Christopher said, oh dear, that's a real problem. He's Scottish, so it's a real problem. Without salt, you don't taste of anything, doesn't it? I mean, it's not entirely true, but Patrick Johansson himself adds salt to buttermilk until, he says, it sings on the palate. But he adds the iodized salt so it won't kill the acid. Very complicated process, as I say, and I'm going to be tasting that in a minute. So there are even mutant bacteria called malt aromatas, which impart malty flavours to butter. And of course, both milk and indeed butter just suffer from photooxidation, never mind keeping it unwrapped in the fridge, and of course it absorbs all the flavours of everything else you've got in there, if it's curry or garlic or what have you. At least the fridge is dark. If you keep it out and not in a butter dish for a very short period of time, it'll have photooxidation, as will milk, in fact. And they get what's called burnt feather effect and stuff like that. It's a very delicate thing. Unfortunately, I mean, I hope you like this diacetyl-containing butter. It's done around some. Unfortunately, that butter spoils much more quickly than the other.
Why?
Because of all these very complex bacteria breakdowns, which I've kind of vaguely touched on. Kate's asked me to make this little paper, which only just touches on it, and you can read Harold McGee for more. And as I say, nobody's got the full picture. I'll make it available rather than going on about it now. But because of these these wars, I mean, it's like kind of Star Wars, or bacteria wars, you know, that go on, and very unpredictably in many ways. Once you've got diacetyl in there, it can either massively multiply and expand due to various mutant strains. I mean, the bacteria that produce diacetyl can multiply at a phenomenally fast rate. You know, 2 or 4 hours, the whole thing is spoiled. But in a fridge, okay, you're kind of low, you know, they're a bit sluggish and all of that, but still other things can happen to spoil them. And very interestingly, you'll taste later, gosh, if we don't run out of time, I'm going to be quick here, 3 butters that are from Isigny, and Waitrose introduced unpasteurized raw butter from Isigny, and both salted and unsalted, and it has completely stopped the unsalted, unpasteurized, and replaced it with a pasteurized one. You can still get the unpasteurized one in Selfridges at a much higher price. And you'll taste all 3 together, the salted and the unsalted, because the unsalted spoils very quickly, and I found, so I got very frustrated after about 4 or 5 days. It didn't taste as phenomenal as it did when I first bought it. However, you know, I overwrapped it in foil, in sort of paper and foil. I tried freezing it. No, spoiled in the freezer, and now, you know, there are bacteria that can operate at those temperatures, and it will spoil. It's that kind of butter that will actually spoil. Very sad.
Is that because of the raw milk, or the fermented?
No, that was a combination of the two.
Right.
It is a fermented, it's got a high level of diacetyl, it is a raw milk product, there are loads and loads of myriads of bacteria kind of working there, and enzymes obviously, working their way through it, and yeah, it spoils very, very quickly. Very sadly, and you know, who can eat to, if only they sold it in small quantities and all that, but no, instead we can no longer, the only place I know to get it is Selfridges, and then yeah, you kind of have to eat it quickly or bake with it or something.
So it could have gone off before you even buy it?
Theoretically it could have, and I've noticed a big difference between the packets, and I'd always look for them on the latest date. There's no guarantee, you're kind of guessing, aren't you? Yeah, yes, it can. There are anaerobic bacteria. I mean, I don't know if you'll have a chance to show the pictures, but again, Patrick Johansson, this kind of mad Viking guru of the butter world, he makes bog butter. He buries butter in peat bogs, which actually has been done for centuries. Our first records are from 300 BC, but in fact it's probably been done earlier than that. And it's just from analysing, you know, carbon counts and all the rest of analysing remains of butter.
Is this one?
We got one there. Yes, it looks really disgusting. However, apparently it tasted really interesting, a bit animally, a bit kind of dank-ish, but very good. Yes, people used to bury butter in peat bogs. I mean, the enemy of butter is oxygen and light. The two main enemies, oxygen and light. And yeah, he's actually buried this butter and he's tasting it at 1 year, 3 year, 5 year and 7 year intervals. Should keep for 7 years.
Yeah. And fish, of course.
But it's fine. No, the lactic acid bacteria, is so many in there that apparently, I mean, he's had it analysed. He works with Nordic Food Lab, who are a non-profit making research organisation, and they have discovered, yeah, it's safe to eat. You let the lactic acid bacteria play. I mean, it might come out very acidic and all that, but it's very safe to eat. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Anything that will kill us now without refrigeration would have killed our ancestors.
Well, precisely, because how long have we had fridges? Not terribly long, no. Okay, very last butter about to come out, and we'll pass these around as well. Okay, you're going to be shaking this butter, but because you must be getting very bored of this, and it's the last one. I will let you have a look and even a taste of these. I've got separate tasters of these. Unfortunately, I had to freeze this, and it's not fully defrosted. It's not quite the right texture. This is what Patrick calls virgin butter. It's what is served at Norma. When it's served at Norma, it's a little bit fluffier, and he actually goes and makes a lot of it at Norma because they have different strains of bacteria to his little wooden hut where he makes most of his, as you can imagine, and they preserve those bacteria very carefully. So the thing is, it is much fluffier. He transported it to London very carefully, but it would still, like whipped cream, it'll deflate a little bit. The butter fat content of this is about 40%, whereas solid butter is 80%. Okay, and milk fat, of course, is something between 2 and 8, depending what milks you're having. But have a look. You can dig in. I've got some ramekins I'll pass around as well, and you'll see from the texture which is which. And this is actually the cream you'll be shaking, so by all means have a taste of that, but stick it on your plate or something. I hope you've got forks or bread or whatever. So this is what he calls smør. Anyway, it's his very particularly fermented cream, which you'll be shaking in a moment. So let me pass one round each end, and then you can have a look at those. And I'll put the ramekins in the middle and let him go around the other way as well. But virgin butter is his love and joy. Sainsbury's farmhouse. Farmhouse almost invariably means it's a whey butter. And a whey butter, actually whey butter is a lot of whey butter is made commercially. We're just not told about it because essentially they separate the butter fat from the whey that comes off after they've separated lots of other fat and proteins for making cheese. The sort of whey, obviously, rather than buttermilk, that runs off cheese still contains globules of fats and proteins, and separate out the fat from that and churn that into whey butter, and it does generally taste quite cheesy. And see if you can tell the difference. Yeah. And then there's Sainsbury's Jersey butter, which is made purely from Jersey milk. And all three have different fat contents. Whether you can tell the difference, I don't know, but they vary quite a lot in fat content, and not as you would expect. So, I was going to ask about whether there is some time. So, the highest in fat of those Sainsbury's butters is the straight farmhouse. The next is the unsalted. And then the third one is the Jersey. So the Jersey cream one is the lowest in fat. Curious, huh? Okay, somebody asked what are we doing with the Graham's Lurpak and Estuary butters. Yeah, you're tasting the difference now before serving Christopher's wonderful food, and you are now about to taste those 3 butters used in 3 different dishes. And Christopher, come and tell us.
Okay, I think this is a real information overload. I'm completely boggled with all that's going on, so just please just let it wash over you, and obviously if you want to come back later on to Sylvia or by email, whatever, so don't worry because there's an awful lot to come yet, would you believe? And we don't have a huge amount of time. But what I've done is I've got 3 different things to give you an idea to be able to taste. The base butters I'm using are Lurpak, Graham's Dairy. I'm a Scotsman, so I brought some Scottish butter down, and also we've got some what's the one, Estuary. And I've done 3 different things. So the first thing you're going to get to taste is some just very simply cooked potatoes. I boiled them with a little bit of salt, and I'm going to pour just literally melted butter over the top of them, and that is it. The butters themselves won't have been seasoned. Potatoes were cooked in salted water, and that's it. So we'll do a bowl down each side. When that bowl is finished, I'll top it up with the next variety of butter, and so on. So you're going to get 3 lots of coming down the table. I know what they are, and I'll tell you about them at the end. But if you can do this relatively quickly, you may have to share potatoes when you get to the far end, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, then after potatoes, I'm going to cook some tender stem, which I'm sure is an advertising thing. Very kindly donated by Tender Stem. I'm doing a beurre blanc. We couldn't get any shallots, so it's a very it's a beurre blanc without
It's
shallots.
a simple beurre blanc to allow us to taste the butter better. That's it.
Very good. So it's got wine vinegar, it's got some white wine, and then I've emulsified the butter in it, and that's it. In fact, I'm quite glad there's no shallots because I don't have to strain it. And then the final thing, the final thing is a secret. I'll tell you what that is later on. Okay, so the first one is going to be the potatoes with just basically melted butter at the top. French really, you know, they take these rules of hygiene with a pinch of salt, literally. The French, I think the flavour you're tasting in French butter is literally the environment as much as anything else.
Yes,
But I was in a restaurant recently, also in Scotland, and the chef there was making his own butter, and he'd seasoned it with seaweed. So I think this is a really interesting thing, and it's absolutely delicious because you've got this fantastic, fresh, very fresh, salty flavour. So it wasn't a sort of natural salt, it was the seaweed which had its own salt in it, and it was absolutely delicious. So I'm sure there's a trend there of restaurants, well, making their own salt.
So does the seaweed matter? Can it be any old ladder?
Well, oh, no. Now we need a workshop on seaweed. Your seaweed should be called a sea vegetable. It should never be gathered from the shore. It should be only gathered at very low tide when it's still alive. Do not pick up, imagine picking up a cauliflower from the side of the road that's been there for a month. Well, that's the same as picking up seaweed off the beach. It's got to be alive, low tide, clean waters, and pull it off the rocks. Do not use seaweed which is just on the shore. Would you, as I said, would you use spinach which has been lying around? No, precisely. It's the same thing. I've just cooked them in salted water. Yeah, they are salted. I'm a chef. I love salt.
Butter flavours. I mean, those who went to the Scandi workshop, oh gosh, it's almost a year ago now, would have seen the butters created by Klaus Dragsholm. I mean, he does fried, crisp chicken skin butters, and he serves artichoke butters. And it's like kind of the second restaurant after Norma that Dragsholm that runs. It's extraordinary, but you see how easy it is to make butter. You can actually shake stuff in with that when you're shaking it, or stir it in afterwards. Stir it in before all the buttermilk is separated. It's very easy, and then separate off the rest of the buttermilk. So there's lots you can do. It's if you want to, that's really amazing.
After I've asked you that little question, I'll tell you what all the butters were. And Sylvia's going to pass around yet more butters. We're all going to go rolling home. And then after that, I'm going to cook some of the green stuff with the beurre blanc on it as well, so you can have a little taste of that. And lastly, I will tell you what, the final thing I've cooked is I baked some shortbread at home, and I brought them out and I cooked them with the 3 different butters as well. So that's just sort of thing you can finish off on.
Okay.
Okay, so A, who preferred A? 2, 3, 4, 5, what, 6, 7, 8?
There's no correct answer.
B, that is the correct answer. B, ooh, maybe a few more perhaps, okay, and C.
Well, evenly divided. Huh?
Okay, well, A was the Ashire, and B was Graham's Dairy from Scotland, which I'm very pleased about because that was good. And then C was Lurpak. Yeah. More of you seem to like Lurpak. Lurpak has got you guys stuck.
Questions? Okay, before we sample the tender stem, before we sample the tender stem, I wouldn't mind chatting just time's a little bit short. I'm now passing around a raft of continental butters. They're all written down on your list, so it's the French and Italian and so on. I just wanted to show you this, which is interesting. According to my friend Patrick, you can keep butter like this, well, as long as it's dark as well, for up to 3 years. Has got one of these modern use-by dates. Keep it in water, keep it dark, it'll keep for up to 3 years. That's an Italian one. You might want to compare the tinned and the bottled. Yeah, no, this one here, bottled. So see how you think they compare, but we haven't got time, Sally, to discuss them all. Just make your own mind as they go along.
So, are there national differences between us? We've got
Okay, that Swiss one is, Swiss are very hot or lactose intolerant. Actually, the thing that I'll explain is, we are all, to some degree, lactose intolerant. There is no animal in the world that actually receives milk voluntarily after weaning from getting anything else. And the bacteria in our gut that digest lactose, break it down, actually decline. And by the time we get very much older, we really suffer. Yeah, I didn't want to be great, but we suffer. We have gas, basically. I mean, the bacteria that multiply actually produce a lot of that. So all of us really are lactose intolerant. Some are very seriously so. This isn't the same as gluten intolerance, but lactose can't break it down, which is very interesting. So the Swiss are very modern, I think, because a lot of lactose-free butters. But I would say that Italian butters are very pale, very worn. I mean, to me, they really don't bring it. There is a third one. This one here, that Kristen got from Marlborough, which is the only one. It's very rare for an Italian butter to be fermented. So maybe fresh cream, northern Italian, the Alpine chocolate butters. This one is fermented. Those are fresh cream, this one is fermented. So really interesting. There are 3 Italian ones. The other 2 are fresh cream, and this one is fermented cream butter.
That's interesting. B and C. That's very, no, A didn't get any. Or 1A. I'm just a very simple chap, so I'm saying it was exactly the same as before. So A was the Ashire, B was the Scottish stuff, and C was Lurpak. And actually, I preferred A. So, and then B, and C was just neither one thing nor the other, which is a bit like what Lurpak really is, isn't it?
It's quite good.
Lurpak here is
You mentioned earlier about cooking pastry and cakes with unsalted butter.
Yes.
Why is that done?
because when I'm from personal cooking chef's point of view, I want to be able to be precise about the amount of salt I'm putting in something. Sometimes I'm doing something with chocolate, for instance, I don't want salt at all, and sometimes if it's a sort of sweet pastry, I don't want salt at all, so I will use unsalted butter, definitely. But if I'm just cooking, frying, or savoury sorts of things, I'm not too bothered if I get either or. Therefore, out of choice, I would get unsalted butter.
So it's a personal taste point of view rather than a performance.
Yes, yes it is, but I think you'll find a lot of chefs think
that's
the
what
same
we were
way.
saying earlier. Yeah, a lot of chefs.
But it is, absolutely. Yeah.
There is one thing about industrial butters, salted butters, which is that they have brine added, so there's a high liquid content, which is quite interesting. Whereas the artisan salted butters, you're right, that turns out a matter of taste because they put crystal salt in. That's an entirely different kettle of fish, as it were. But the brine that's added will alter the fat-water ratio as well.
Oh, so that flavours it rather than salt.
But yes, it will alter when making pastry. It makes a difference.
Between cooking with unsalted butter and then adding salt to your recipes,
Yes.
and it is cooking with salted butter. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And because if you're cooking with unsalted butter, then you're adding the salt of your choice.
yeah, but also
That's
there
important.
is a different flavour
Yeah,
in the butter
absolutely.
from Italy. We've had it. Look,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
that
You can
it's
tell.
much sweeter and cleaner
Yeah.
than unsalted butter.
I'm surprised less of you preferred the sherry. I thought the
I
sherry
want to
was
stand up for
absolutely
Lurpak.
stunning.
May I just say, I've never bought Lurpak. I've always despised the thought of Lurpak. I've always thought it was the lowest of the low. Actually, tasting it in the food cooking, I thought it had a verdancy at the end, which actually was quite pleasant. You know, I'm sure you didn't want to. That cooking, I thought that came out quite well.
Stupid, are they?
I'm
Lurpak Arla have a
Absolutely.
huge
Absolutely
research
right.
centre, and in fact they are researching all sorts of extraordinary variants of milk and different sea salts and so on at their research centre. So that, no, they're not stupid, and they're producing the best standard at the best price that they can. But it's amazing what they do at their research centre. We hope to have some special butter. They couldn't get it over, and they are doing extraordinary things. They do a lot of research. So yeah, it's not rubbish.
We were saying the one in the glass was the most amazing butter to actually taste on the bread. But for cooking, we were like, we wouldn't want to waste that.
Yeah.
It could, you know, so for us, the balance of having something like that was completely but then having because we didn't know about that before we came. You can have something that good.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yes, I use different French butters for baking and for a chocolate work where I'm just melting the butter. But I mean, there isn't time. We're going to finish with an array of the French butters followed by Christopher's shortbread, and it's just what we've been talking about, so it's very apt. And the French butters, 3 of them are AOP Poitou-Charentes. They each have their proponents, and some people say they're the best in the world. And then you have butters like the Weber, considered the best in the world. Just make up your own minds. They're very different. Even the Poitou-Charentes ones are very different from each other. They're all good butters. See what you think.
And think about it. I haven't been very clever. I'm a very simple chap. So A, I'm afraid, again, is sherry. B is the Scottish one, and C is Lurpak. I'll tell you the I shouldn't have done. I'd be really interested to know what you think. My shortbread is made very simply, just plain flour, B row, if you're interested, caster sugar, and a little bit of ground rice. As the next review, which gives it a wee bit of crunch, I think. And the butters, I think, it's fascinating what it does. I personally do not like A at all, the sherry one. I just do not think the sherry works as a baked product. I loved, obviously, my Scottish one because I think that one is almost bred to have a sense of what you like. And as a Scots boy, growing up in Aberdeenshire originally, and then where I'm in Fife now, I love the Graham's flavour, but having said that, the sherry won it for me with the green stuff. Whereas this one, I'm ashamed to say that I'm toying between Lurpak, I can't believe I'm actually saying that, and so that's C, and B, which is the Graham's Dairy butter. Because I think the shortbread is very rich, it's very sugary. This is classic Scottish baking stuff, and I think the Graham's Dairy adds that slightly unsophisticated but rich buttery flavour, which is what Scots we all seem to look for. And the Dutch seem to think, because they're very clever at marketing, as somebody over there said earlier on, they seem to have cottoned on to this, and there's just enough richness in the Lurpak to make the shortbread also taste quite good. But that's just my thoughts, but I'd be interested to see what everybody else thinks. So once you've all gone around, they all have alphabet initials on them. We'll do a little straw poll in a second or two. But I hope you like it. Please don't be critical about my baking. It's the butter we're on.